The world of rock music lost one of its most powerful and emotional voices when Roy Orbison died at the age of 52. He suffered a heart attack at his home in Nashville, Tennessee, and passed away shortly after reaching the hospital. At the time, the news shocked fans across the world. Roy had been one of the biggest stars of the 1960s, and only a short while before his death, his music had once again climbed the charts through collaborations with artists like Bob Dylan and George Harrison. For decades, people believed his death was simply the result of a weak heart finally giving out. That was the story everyone accepted. But years later, leaked medical records suggested something more troubling. His doctors had noticed warning signs months before his death. They found traces of substances in his body that should not have been there. Even more unsettling was the fact that his final recording session was not focused on making music. Roy was reportedly recording evidence related to the tragedy that had destroyed his family years earlier. The fire that killed his two young sons was officially ruled an accident, but Roy believed otherwise. He had gathered proof that suggested the fire was intentional. According to these claims, someone did not want that truth to come out. The recording he left behind was said to reveal who was truly responsible for the deaths within the Orbison family, a revelation that would have shaken the world if it had ever fully surfaced. Roy Kelton Orbison was born on April 23, 1936, in the small town of Vernon, Texas, at 3:30 in the afternoon. His arrival came during the hard years of the Dust Bowl, when the land was dry, the air was filled with dirt, and families struggled daily just to survive. His parents, Orby Lee Orbison and Nadine Schultz Orbison, lived modestly, always moving where work could be found. Orby worked as an oil well driller and sometimes as a garage mechanic, and the sounds of machines, engines, and country music blended together in Roy's earliest memories. Vernon was not an easy place to grow up. Dust storms swept through the town, and nights were long and quiet. Yet inside that small house, something special began to grow. When Roy was 6 years old, he asked for a harmonica. Instead, his father placed a guitar in his hands and showed him simple chords late at night after work. That guitar became his closest companion. It shaped his future and gave him a way to express feelings he could not put into words. As Roy grew older, his love for music grew stronger. By the age of 6, he was already learning songs his father played during family gatherings. By 8, he was standing in front of a microphone at the local radio station, KVWC, singing Hank Williams songs like Lovesick Blues. He earned small amounts of money for these performances, usually just enough to help pay for school supplies, but every dollar mattered to a family still living under the shadow of the Great Depression. His voice sounded far older than his age, and listeners quickly noticed something special about the young boy on the radio. People around town began talking about him. Encouraged by this attention, Roy started writing his own songs, carefully putting his feelings onto paper before sharing them with anyone else. When he was 8, he earned a regular weekly spot on KVWC. At 9, he won a radio contest that gave him his own show every Saturday. Around that same time, he wrote his first song, A Vow of Love, while sitting outside his grandmother's house. In 1946, he entered a talent contest connected to a traveling medicine show. He sang Mountain Dew and Joel Blon and tied for first place. The prize was $15. Roy took his share, $7.50, and gave half of it to a friend who had carried his guitar for him. Even as a child, he showed generosity and humility, traits that stayed with him long before fame ever arrived. Later that year, the Orbison family moved to Wink, Texas, where Orby found work in the oil fields. Wink was small, dry, and isolated, nothing like Vernon. Roy later described it as a place of football, oil, grease, and sand, with nothing soft or comforting about it. The emptiness of the land and the silence of the town settled deep inside him. That loneliness would later echo through the songs that made him famous. At 13, Roy formed his first band, the Wink Westerners. They practiced country and swing music and soon began playing at local honky-tonks. They even landed a weekly radio show in nearby Kermit, Texas. Slowly, money started coming in. At one dance, Roy earned $400, an enormous amount for a teenager in the 1940s. Each performance strengthened his belief that music might be his way out of a hard life. But tragedy soon struck. In 1953, when Roy was only 17, his mother Nadine died suddenly from a respiratory illness. The loss devastated him. Wink already felt lonely, and now the person who grounded him was gone. Roy took on odd jobs to help support his father, sometimes pumping gas late into the night. His grief turned inward, and music became the place where he stored his pain. Every feeling of loss, loneliness, and confusion found its way into his songs. Those emotions later became the heart of his most powerful ballads. In 1954, Roy enrolled at North Texas State College in Denton to study geology, thinking he might need a practical backup plan. But geology did not inspire him. Music did. After 1 year, he switched to studying history and English. While in college, he kept the Wink Westerners alive, playing fraternity parties and writing new material. In 1955, they recorded Ooby Dooby at Jim Beck's studio in Dallas, inspired by the new rockabilly sound coming out of Sun Records. The song became a local hit, and for the first time, Roy realized that music was no longer just a dream. It was a real future. He left North Texas State after only 1 semester and transferred to Odessa Junior College. There, he formed a new band called the Teen Kings. They won a talent show that earned them a television spot in Midland, Texas. That success pushed Roy toward Memphis. In April 1956, the Teen Kings auditioned for Sun Records after a record store owner played Ooby Dooby for Sam Phillips over the phone. Phillips liked what he heard and invited them in. On March 19, 1956, they re-recorded the song, and it later reached number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100, selling around 200,000 copies. Roy experienced national success for the first time. But problems soon followed. Roy wanted to record emotional ballads, while Phillips wanted fast, energetic rockabilly songs. Their creative visions did not match. Follow-up singles failed, the Teen Kings broke up by the end of the year, and Roy left Sun Records after only 7 months. He also grew frustrated over money disputes, believing Phillips took too much from his earnings. For a brief moment, Roy even considered leaving music to work in the oil fields like his father. But music pulled him back when Claudette, a song he wrote for his wife, became the B-side to the Everly Brothers hit All I Have to Do Is Dream. The song reached number 30 in 1959. With the royalties, Roy bought a pink Cadillac, spent the money quickly, and soon found himself broke again, living with his parents. Still, Claudette proved he could write successful songs. In 1957, Roy signed with Acuff Rose in Nashville, where Wesley Rose believed in his talent and helped him focus on songwriting and publishing. This support allowed Roy to buy out his Sun Records contract. He opened for Johnny Cash at the Grand Ole Opry and toured honky-tonks across the South. Crowds enjoyed the lively music, but when Roy sang his slower songs, people stopped talking and listened closely. His voice demanded attention. Trouble struck again when Roy discovered his manager had been stealing money from him. Betrayed and nearly broke, he returned to Nashville and survived by singing demo tracks. This difficult period pushed him toward Monument Records, where he finally found his true sound. In 1959, Roy walked into Monument Records carrying more hope than certainty. Everything changed when producer Fred Foster heard Uptown. Though the song only reached number 72 on the charts, the B-side, Only the Lonely, became a sensation. Released in May 1960, it reached number 2 in the United States and number 1 in the United Kingdom. It sold over 1 million copies and stayed on the UK charts for 24 weeks. Roy's dramatic voice, rising strings, and emotional delivery created a sound unlike anything else on the radio. By the end of 1961, the song had sold another 1 million copies and made Roy an international star. Other artists studied his style, and fans connected deeply to the heartbreak in his voice. Roy's quiet stage presence became part of his legend. Unlike performers who danced and moved constantly, Roy stood almost still, dressed in black, letting his voice do all the work. His dark sunglasses became his signature after he wore them on stage by accident and felt less exposed. Songs like Blue Angel, Running Scared, and Crying solidified his place in music history. Crying alone sold millions of copies and later earned a place in the Grammy Hall of Fame. Even as his career soared, his personal life suffered. His marriage to Claudette struggled under the weight of touring and fame. They divorced, remarried, and tried to rebuild, showing how success can lift a person up while quietly tearing their private world apart. Roy Orbison's life was filled with triumph, loss, mystery, and deep emotion. His music came from real pain and real love, and that honesty is why it still touches people today. His voice remains timeless, echoing across generations, carrying the loneliness, hope, and beauty that defined his extraordinary life. On July 24, 1964, Roy Orbison and his songwriting partner Bill Dees wrote a song in about 40 minutes while sitting at Roy's home. Claudette, Roy's wife at the time, told him she was going out, and Bill jokingly said that a pretty woman never needs money. That joke sparked something instantly. Roy began singing the opening line right away, and the rest of the song flowed naturally. That song became Oh, Pretty Woman. It was recorded on August 1 at RCA Studio B in Nashville, with 4 guitarists playing on the track, including Roy himself. When the song was released, it exploded. By September 1964, it reached #1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom. It sold more than 7 million copies and became Roy's second #1 single. Some radio stations initially refused to play it because they thought the bass line sounded too sexual, but that controversy only made the song more popular. It went on to become one of the biggest songs of the entire decade. While the song brought massive success, it also marked the beginning of serious trouble in Roy's personal life. In 1964, Roy admitted that he had been involved in encounters with groupies while touring. Claudette already felt lonely because Roy was rarely home, and jealousy slowly grew between them. That tension eventually pushed Claudette into having an affair of her own. When Roy discovered this, he was deeply hurt and angry. In November 1964, at the exact same time Oh, Pretty Woman was sitting at the top of the charts, Roy filed for divorce. By early 1965, the divorce was finalized. Despite everything, they still loved each other, and within 10 months they found their way back together. They remarried, hoping to rebuild what fame, distance, and fear had broken. For a short time, things felt calm again, but happiness did not last. On June 6, 1966, Roy and Claudette were riding motorcycles near Gallatin, Tennessee. Suddenly, a pickup truck pulled out in front of them. Claudette was thrown from her bike and suffered fatal injuries. She died about an hour later in Roy's arms. She was only 24 years old. Roy survived with minor injuries, but emotionally he was shattered. The shock left him silent and broken. He canceled shows for months and struggled to function in a world that suddenly felt empty. He buried Claudette in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and tried to keep going despite the pain. Just 2 months later, his song Too Soon to Know reached #3 in the United Kingdom, carrying his grief into the music. Even before her death, Roy had recorded Crawling Back in October 1965. The song reached #46, but his record label pushed him to record happier material that did not match the sorrow he felt inside. Those recording sessions were emotionally painful for him, as the pressure to sound upbeat clashed with the deep sadness he carried. Crawling Back became a quiet reflection of his emotional state, even if many listeners did not fully understand it at the time. Then came a tragedy almost too painful to describe. On September 14, 1968, while Roy was touring in England, a fire broke out at his home in Hendersonville. His 2 sons, Roy Dwayne, who was 10, and Anthony, who was 6, died in their sleep. Only his youngest son, Wesley, who was 3 years old, survived because his grandparents were able to pull him from the house. The fire destroyed the home in less than an hour. Investigators believe the fire started when an aerosol can exploded due to faulty wiring. Roy received the news while overseas, and it completely crushed him. For a long time afterward, he could not write music, could barely speak, and struggled just to stand under the weight of his loss. After the fire, he sold the property to Johnny Cash. Cash planted an orchard on the land and told Roy that only good things would grow there now. That simple act meant a great deal to Roy and became a symbol of healing. He later said he wanted to remember the love connected to that place, not only the pain. Over the years, the land changed owners several times, and by 2008, Barry Gibb built a new home there. Still, the memory of that tragedy remained deeply rooted in Roy's heart. The grief began to destroy Roy's health. He smoked heavily, sometimes up to 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He had suffered from ulcers since 1960, and the stress made them worse. Doctors warned him that his body was breaking down from the inside. Even so, he kept performing. Music was the only thing that kept him moving forward, the only thing that gave him purpose when life kept taking everything away from him. In 1965, Roy made a major career decision. He left Monument Records, the label that had brought him his biggest hits, and signed with MGM. MGM offered him $1 million contract and promised movie opportunities. It sounded like a fresh start, but the deal came with heavy pressure. Roy was required to record 3 full albums every year along with several singles. In his first year alone, he recorded more than 70 songs. His first MGM single, Right Away, barely made it into the Billboard chart, peaking near number 100. At the same time, the Beatles and the rest of the British invasion dominated radio stations. His first MGM album did reach number 1 in Canada and the United Kingdom, but in the United States, it was largely ignored. By the end of his time with MGM, only 3 of his songs had reached the US top 40. Even though he continued to write and co-write much of his material, the timing around him no longer worked in his favor. In 1967, Roy toured Australia for 14 days and performed 20 shows during that short time. He appeared in cities like Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, and Mount Gambier. On January 21st, he even performed 2 shows in one day at Sydney Stadium. However, he carried deep sadness with him because he was still grieving the loss of Claudette. Jet lag, exhaustion, and emotional pain weakened his voice. Reviewers said he sounded hoarse and tired. Even so, he showed up every night and gave what he could, even when it drained him further. Each performance took something from him that he did not have the strength to recover. In 1968, he released the song Walk On. Many fans felt it was one of his most emotional recordings, but it was covered in heavy orchestration that Roy never wanted. MGM forced an overproduced sound that buried the purity of his voice. The song reached modest chart positions in several countries but failed to make a real impact in the United States. It became a symbol of Roy's ongoing struggle with record label control, where his artistic vision was often ignored. Life continued to move forward. On March 25, 1969, Roy married Barbara Jacobs in Nashville. She was 19 years old. He had met her not long before losing his 2 sons in the house fire. The wedding attracted heavy media attention, with many people calling it a rebound marriage. Others treated it like gossip rather than a serious moment of healing. But for Roy, Barbara brought light back into his life. Together, they later had 2 sons, Roy Kelton Jr. and Alexander. Roy became fiercely protective of his new family, determined not to lose them the way he had lost so much before. Later that year, Roy returned to Nashville for new recording sessions with MGM, but the loneliness only deepened. Even Bob Dylan noticed how withdrawn Roy had become, saying that he barely spoke, as if the weight of everything had pulled him inward. Roy often recorded with session musicians instead of close friends, and the studio felt cold and distant. Years of pressure, loss, and creative control by record labels had pushed him into a place where music no longer felt like home. In 1970, Roy released the album The Fastest Guitar Alive, which included the song Penny Arcade. That song reached number 1 in the United Kingdom, giving him his 3rd UK number 1 hit. It showed that British audiences still appreciated his voice deeply. However, in the United States, the album sold poorly. Disco music was rising, and Roy's emotional ballads felt out of place. Even though the album later became a collector's item, at the time it felt like another sign that his connection with American listeners was fading. The years that followed were difficult. In 1972, during a demanding British tour, Roy damaged his throat and had to stop performing for 6 months. The silence frustrated him deeply, but he used the time to write music for a film, which earned him a Golden Globe nomination. Still, the injury frightened him. He worried his voice might never fully recover, and missing promotional opportunities hurt his career even more. In 1973, he signed with Mercury Records and tried to adapt to changing musical trends. He recorded a country rock version of Sweet Caroline, hoping to reach new audiences. But glam rock and punk music were dominating the scene, with artists like David Bowie and Lou Reed capturing attention. Roy's single barely charted, and the album sold modestly. Even so, this period opened doors for future country collaborations that helped him later. By the late 1970s, Roy's health reached a critical point. In 1977, while vacationing in Hawaii, he experienced severe chest pain. Doctors discovered advanced coronary artery disease. On January 18, 1978, he underwent triple bypass heart surgery. He lost significant weight and spent months recovering, but he never fully gave up smoking. Against medical advice, he returned to performing earlier than he should have because music was the one thing he could not live without. In 1979, another setback occurred when a tour bus accident in Canada caused a serious infection. Doctors warned him that continued touring could kill him due to his ulcers and heart problems. Roy ignored many of these warnings and kept performing, adjusting his schedule slightly but refusing to stop completely. In 1980, he released the album Laminar Flow, a futuristic project filled with synthesizers and experimental sounds. The album did not chart and confused many listeners at the time. However, years later, some fans praised its boldness and compared it to early electronic music by bands like Depeche Mode and the Human League. It was not a commercial success, but it showed Roy's willingness to explore new ideas. Everything changed again in 1988 when Roy joined the Traveling Wilburys with George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. What began as a casual recording turned into a full album that sold millions of copies. Roy, known as Lefty Wilbury in the group, added the soaring harmonies fans had missed for years. The success reintroduced him to a new generation and felt like a rebirth. Soon after, he recorded the album Mystery Girl. Released just weeks after his death, it included the hit You Got It, which reached number 9 on the Billboard chart, his highest position since 1964. The album sold millions worldwide and reminded the world of the beauty of his voice. Throughout this final period, Roy often complained of chest pain, but he brushed it off. Years of smoking and heart disease had weakened him, but he believed he could push through. On December 6, 1988, he collapsed in his bathroom after spending a happy day with his sons. He was only 52 years old. Doctors could not save him. His death shocked the world, even though the warning signs had been there for years. After his passing, Mystery Girl earned him a Grammy, and his legacy continued through new technology, tributes, and tours that brought his voice back to life for fans around the world.